Welcome to our, hello, is this on? It's better? I'm Shai Joseph, the founding director of the Women's South Asian Studies program and professor of anthropology and gender studies, and I welcome you to our second in the series of the Iranian Studies lecture series. This series was founded as a result of the generosity of three families who were told me not to mention their names again. They're here and we're very grateful to them. And it helps build the basis, the foundation for the Iranian Studies program within the Middle East South Asian Studies program. For those of you who don't know, we won an endowment from the Prosperity Foundation last year, and the payout for that endowment kicks in 2012-13. So 2012-13, we will have a visiting lecturer in Iranian Studies who will be in residence for 1 quarter to 2 courses on Iran. This is, of course, in addition to our own faculty, Dr. Ali Musha and Dr. Charlotte, who will also teach on Iran. We are working very hard to develop a minor in Iranian Studies, a minor in Indian South Asian Studies, and a minor in Arab Studies within the major of Middle South Asian Studies. And to a large extent, our success in getting this far and doing so is the result of the enormous support we have from the community. Many of you are here, from the students who have lobbied for this program, who have written petitions, who've sat at the door of the deans and the chancellor to get this program launched. So truly, MESA is a collective effort of the students, the faculty, the administration, and the community. This evening, we are very delighted to have with us a very dear friend of mine, Dr. Farzaneh Milani. And we have one more speaker in this series, Dr. Ali Al-Saida. You have the flyers out there. We also have an Arab Studies lecture series, which is funded by the donations also of a community member, an international community member. We already had one of the speakers, Juan Cole, come in that series, and we have another speaker, Dr. Sabah Mahmoud, from UCB, who will be coming in that series. And those flyers, please help yourself to the flyers in the on the table in the back, so you can see the speakers that we have coming up. And I want to introduce now to you Dr. Ali Musha, Associate Professor in Islamic History, who is going to be introducing our distinguished speaker this evening. Dr. Musha.
I was told I should speak louder so everyone can hear. Is this good? Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Ali Anushar. I'm a faculty in the History Department, as Professor Joseph just mentioned. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing to you Professor Farzaneh Milani from the University of Virginia, and she is our first guest speaker in 2012 of the Suad Joseph Iranian Studies lecture series. Farzaneh Milani is a professor in the departments of Middle Eastern and South Asian languages and cultures, as well as studies in women and gender at the University of Virginia, Charlottesville, which, if you haven't been to, it's a very beautiful city in Virginia. I highly recommend it. It was listed of, I think, one of the top 10 cities to live in America. Professor Milani began her academic career studying French literature, actually here in California as an undergraduate. And then as a graduate student, she worked on the poetry of Forough Farrokhzad. And those of you who are not familiar, Forough Farrokhzad is probably the greatest, one of the greatest, if not the greatest, of the modernist Iranian poets of the 20th century. She was controversial at the time because she challenged gender norms in mid-20th century Iranian society because of the erotic quality of her early verse. So Professor Milani chose her as her topic of dissertation research at UCLA, and she completed that. In her new book, which just came out actually a few months ago, in April of 2011, her newest book is entitled Words, Not Swords, Iranian Women Writers and Freedom of Movement. I'll talk about this book in a little bit in a minute. but this was published recently. In this book, she reflects back on the time of her dissertation research on photo of Farrokhzad in Iran, and she said that she was trying to meet with people and do interviews with people who knew her. She was doing a kind of a biographical work on her. And she said she was very excited that in Tehran, she actually, I think it was in Tehran, but she actually got to meet Ibrahim Golestan, who was Farrokhzad's lover, and he was famous in his own right as a progressive filmmaker and intellectual perhaps. But she said that when she met him, he was not very forthcoming, and in some ways sort of was wondering why she was writing a book on Farrokhzad, and she told her a quote, "Why don't you write a cookbook in English? Persian cuisine is exquisitely delicious. Imagine what a contribution such a book will make." End quote. So this is an anecdote that, of course, makes us laugh now in retrospect, but I think it was a sign of major challenges facing women like herself who were pushing the boundaries of patriarchy in, if not in Iranian society, definitely in Iranian studies, the field of scholarly study in Iran. So a lot has changed since then. Perhaps not enough, but a lot. At least in the field of Iranian studies. And Professor Milani's scholarship has been a major contribution to this change. During her very prolific scholarly career, she has so far produced over 100 publications. These include articles, book chapters, prologues, forewords to books, but also several books. Her first book, Veils and Words, which came out with Syracuse University Press, has gone through 16 reprints. It's sold out and it's been reprinted 16 times. She has also edited books on Iranian literature and translation. She has also translated Persian poetry into English. And here I have in mind her book on another very famous Iranian poet of the 20th century, Simin Behbahani. The book is called The Cup of Sin, Selected Poems of Simin Behbahani, edited and translated with Kaveh Safa. And this book won the Lewis Roth Award for Best Translations. She has served as the guest editor in major journals of the field of Iranian studies, such as the Journal of Iranian Studies, Iran Name, Nime Digar. She has given over 150 lectures at universities and colleges nationally and internationally. And in the midst of all this, she has found time to write her own poetry, which have appeared in Persian language journals such as Nime Digar, Par, Barayan, Daneshju, Omi, Alway, Portland. And her prolific scholarship has certainly not taken away from her teaching. In fact, we seem to work well together. She won the University of Virginia Teacher of the Year Award and was subsequently nominated the following year for the best faculty for teaching at the whole state of Virginia. So it's a very accomplished CV. I only briefly mentioned some highlights. We are very glad that she accepted our invitation. The title of her talk, as you've seen in the flyers, will be Flight and Captivity in the Writing of Iranian Women Writers. And from what I understand, the paper draws on her most recent book that I mentioned earlier. And just to give you an idea what the book is about, it's basically an investigation into the theme of movement in the writings of Iranian women poets, novelists, and other literati during the last 150 years. And when I say movement, I don't mean social mobility, I mean physical movement, barriers of movement actually moving in society, from going from place to place, riding on motorcycles, etc. So that she's looking at the roles of these women writers at the forefront of the desegregation of movement in society and the renegotiation of boundaries that aim to block them or prevent them. So I'm sure we're all, after this brief introduction, you're all eager to hear her speak on this aspect of her important book. So please join me in welcoming Professor Milani.
Now, can you all hear me? Yes. You can. tuning. So if you can't hear me, please tell me so I can raise my voice. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm truly honored to be here tonight. First of all, I think it is a unique program in the whole country, to the best of my knowledge, that a group of Iranians, that I am very proud to be a member of that country with them, have begun a program that recognizes a unique person whose field is Arabic literature, Arab anthropology, and Arab society. I've had the honor to know Suad Joseph for a few decades. I feel honored to be her friend, and you couldn't have done honor to Iranians more than recognizing someone like Suad Joseph. I want to thank all the Iranians who have done that. This is great. I believe my country of birth has been, in a way, misrepresented in the last few decades in this country. There is a confiscated Iran that is hidden from most Americans, who are generally speaking very open to other cultures, but they have not heard about that confiscated Iran, the literary Iran, the peace-loving people of Iran, the artistic output of Iran, in spite of all the problems. So a program like that brings that to the fore and gives a glimpse of another Iran to everybody in this country. I also have a few friends. I have a student of mine from 10 years ago at the University of Virginia here. I have some dear friends from 40 years ago, Feridun Qadiri and her dear family, Farideh, Mrs. Qadiri, Midri, my dear friend, the artist. So I'm sorry I can't go over all the names so that I can start my conversation with you tonight. First and foremost, of course, I should thank every single one of you for giving me the honor to share some thoughts with you tonight on the issue of sex segregation, the issue of freedom of mobility. And my focus will be literature, because that's my field. But I'm going to start with a little bit of current affairs, with the argument that what's happening in the Middle East and North Africa is a reflection of what has been happening in that part of the world, to different degrees and during different times, but at least in the subject that I will be addressing tonight, Iran, for 160 years. So what is happening is not out of nowhere. So let me start with this beautiful line by Furul Farrokhzad. Remember flight, the bird is mortal. پرواز را به خاطر بسپار، پرنده مردنی است. You will see in a minute why this line is so important and why I think it captures so much of what I want to say tonight. These are exhilarating and challenging times in the Middle East and in North Africa. From the Green Movement in Iran, to the Jasmine Revolution in Tunisia, to all the various uprisings in various parts of the Arab world that have come to be known the Arab Spring. We see people have come to ask for their human dignity, to ask for their democratic rights, and to do so in a non-violent way. I want to enumerate a few of the characteristic features of these movements that are shaking the foundation of the region. And then later on, hopefully, I will prove to you that all of these qualities could have been witnessed in the poetry of Iranian women in the last 160 years. So this has been a nonviolent movement. And to me, who is a believer in peace, who believes war and violence will never be an answer to our problems, I'm very excited about that. We want freedom, even a small child can say. This is a movement also that is youth-oriented and youth-generated. And this is also very exciting. And in a minute, I will show you a couple of other slides when you will see that most governments and most previous movements were geriatrics, very old people. So we have lots of younger people, forward-looking people involved in these movements. A third characteristic for me of all these movements, who have many differences because they are in response to local needs, but they have these features in common. It is technologically savvy. It is global in its reach and in its outreach. These are images you couldn't see, for instance, in the Islamic Revolution. I mean, it's true, we didn't have a Twitter back then, but the revolution was not global. It did not have the world as its interlocutors. The Arab Spring, the Green Movement in Iran does. So these are interesting images. And antique dictators for sale, which goes back in a way to the fact that this is a youth-oriented kind of movement. Look at these people, all male, all over a certain age. As I get older myself, my definition of old changes. But I still call these people a little too old for ruling over such young people. And many of these countries have an average age of 27, 28, 30 people. And like in Iran, the average age of our leaders is over 70. You know, for a group of people whose age is around 30. By way of introduction, I said all these qualifications of these interesting movements. But to me, the most unique, the most unprecedented quality of all these movements is their desegregated nature. For the first time, we see women veiled and unveiled, urban and rural, educated, we know from knowing some of them, educated and not so very educated, young and old, walking shoulder to shoulder and side by side with men. This is, of course, the Nobel Peace Laureate, a woman from Yemen. So I think these desegregated on an unprecedented scale of these demonstrations is an iconic moment, like this man who stood in front of the tanks, the roaring tanks, in Tiananmen Square in China, and was a harbinger of a new era. These women are the harbinger of a new era. Look at these images from the Islamic Revolution of 33 years ago, where old men usually were singing death to this and death to that. They were holding guns, there was anger, and that has been replaced. Ayatollah Khomeini was the man of the year. and now a young woman is the person of the year. So women have come to replace the image of angry men who were, again, not global in their outreach either. This is the sad image of Neda, of a sultan. By the way, this and the video of that is the most watched video in the whole world. It's only 47 seconds in length, and yet no video in the world has been watched like this video. Now, it's a sad image. It's an image of a young woman who was only casting a vote. But it speaks of a replacement that is a very important replacement. And more important to that, this woman, this Egyptian Mahfouz woman, who talked on Facebook and Twitter and challenged men to join her at Tahrir Square. Please remember, traditionally, it was always men who would go to these demonstrations. And this time, it's a woman challenging men, telling them, I'm going. If you're man enough, come and join me there. I think what happened in Saudi Arabia, a bunch of women asking for the freedom of the road, wanting to drive. I don't like the back seat, symbolically significant. So desegregation then, as I see it, is something that we need to think more about, that I think will tell us a lot more about what is to come in the region, in the Middle East and North Africa. What do I mean by sex segregation? My definition of it, and I realize there are many different definitions. Mine is mainly focused on space, because I think the separation of the world of men and women, sex segregation, has been practiced for centuries in Iran. Now, with your permission, I'm going to very gently move into Iran, which is the subject that I wanted to mainly focus on. But I gave you this introduction to say that what I'm saying in the rest of my talk, I think is applicable to all these other countries with minor variation. Every movement is, of course, in response to the local needs. So then sex segregation separates the world of men and women. And it does so by dividing the space. In Iran, we have Andaruni and Biruni. We have the inner sanctum and the outside world. It also creates hierarchies around those divides. If you are in the outside world, if you produce the kind of art that is in the outside world, that's valued much more. If you are a cook, and you cook for your family and you're the best cook, it doesn't matter as much. But the minute men become chefs, then the art of cooking is elevated to a different degree. Professor Anushar referred to my first meeting with Mr. Golestan. It was right after I had finished my dissertation. And as my colleague so eloquently referred to it, when I started asking him about Furu Farrokhzad, I had just finished the whole dissertation on her. He looked at me and he said, can I ask you a question? And I thought, being young and innocent at the time, I thought he probably wants to know something about my dissertation or something. He said, why don't you write a cookbook? In other words, as a woman, you belong inside the kitchen or in the bedroom. And what's the significance of that? To me, writing a cookbook is a great art. I would be proud to do so. But I don't think he saw it that way. at least back then. I have to tell you that he has changed his mind, and he allowed me to interview him for 5 full days. And so that was an accomplishment. So freedom of movement is a basic human right. Article 13 of the Declaration of Human Rights recognizes it as basic human rights. Without freedom of movement, if you're not allowed to leave the Andaruli, the inner sanctum, you don't have easy access to education, you don't have access to centers of power, you don't have political representation, you are not a major presence in the arts, in the labor force, and even in religion. We know, for instance, that talking about Islam, for centuries, beyond the first century of Islam, men were the only interpreters of the scripture. It's beginning to change now. My theory is very simple. A woman not only needs a room of her own. As you know, Virginia Woolf, one of my most favorite writers, has a seminal book by that title. She also needs the freedom to leave that room and to return to it without incurring any penalties. Because a room without that freedom is a prison cell. That's the definition of prison. If you think about a prison, a prisoner can do anything that we all do. They eat, they sleep, they watch film, they write, they receive phone calls, they call. The only thing they can't do, they can't leave that prison cell whenever they want or return to it whenever they want. Their freedom of movement is constrained. And of course, Michel Foucault, in his wonderful book, The Birth of the Prison, doesn't talk about that, but the subtext of it is exactly that fantastic. In Iran, for centuries, femininity and masculinity were defined in terms of space. You know, in Persian, we have Mard-e-Meydan, because the public square belonged to men, and men belonged to the public square. And we had Zan-e-Khanim. Women belonged inside the house, traditionally speaking. Mobility, freedom of movement, was a desired trait in men. It was, in fact, a prerequisite of virility. I don't know if some of you have watched the movie Hasan Kachar, which is a classic of Iranian cinema. Hasan Kachar was a man who didn't want to leave his house. His mother was going crazy. Now, the day I became a woman, another fantastic Iranian movie, is the reverse of that. It's the story of a woman, 9-year-old woman, who wants to go out and play in the street. And the reverse happens. Her mother and her grandmother are going crazy, but if you go on the street, you're no longer a good Muslim. You're not a good person. You have to stay inside the house now. Just give you a couple of pictures, men and their flights, and of course, the woman is stationary, and it's the men who flying tigers. So I'm going to take about 5 minutes of your time to just give you a global context of what I just said, so that we know restricting women's mobility is not the monopoly of only one faith and one country. It happens globally. Look at these symbols of masculinity and femininity. Look at the symbol of femininity, Venus, mirror of Venus. It's attached, it's immobile, and it's a prisoner of a handheld mirror. a prisoner of the body and how a woman looks. And look at the other one, symbol of masculinity. Upward looking, unattached. The sky is the limit. I'm going to give you a few other examples globally. Foot binding in China, practiced for over 1,000 years. What did foot binding do? In fact, I've been very interested in comparison of foot binding and imposed bathing, and the similarities are mind-boggling. Foot binding literally broke the foot of a woman, the feet of a woman, and kind of paralyzed her, restricted her movement. Cinderella, the most famous, the most popular fairy tale in the world. What is the most important qualification of Cinderella? Her tiny little feet. There is no one else in the country that can fit those slippers. Cinderella, the oldest written version of Cinderella, comes in fact from China when foot binding started. Does the same thing. Barbie, the icon of Western beauty now, of modern beauty. Everything about Barbie has changed except her tiny little feet. In human size, the feet of Barbie are those of a 4-year-old girl. She weighs about 110, 120 pounds. I've done all the calculation, and probably half of it is in her breast. But those feet are tiny feet. That's why she can never stand on her own. Now, what about the counter-ideal women? Not only in Iran, throughout the world. The counter-ideal woman, the woman who is mobile, the woman who goes places, is either a streetwalker, a term of opprobrium for prostitution, or is a witch. What is the most important qualification of a witch? They fly on a broomstick. What is so scary about a woman who flies? We saw Tiger, a flying tiger. I mean, that's John Wayne, the hero. But a woman who flies on a broomstick. The very symbol of her domesticity, she becomes a witch, who, by the way, also always has huge feet and flat feet, the opposite of Cinderella, the symbol of restraint, movement. You know, with those tiny feet, you can't run. Now, think of all the fairy tales and the large number of sleeping beauties in them. Sleeping Beauty, you can't get more immobile than Sleeping Beauty unless you're dead. Now, things are beginning to change. There is a new narrative of ideal femininity, ideal beauty. We have Wonder Woman, and we have Spider Woman, who is bored with dolls. Even Jasmine, the prisoner of Aladdin, the Walt Disney movie, at the end becomes mobile. You know, I think if Cinderella went from rags to riches, Jasmine goes from immobility to unrestrained mobility by the end of the film. The reason she's so interested in Aladdin is because he can offer her the magic carpet. And look at this beautiful line from the movie. Soaring, tumbling, freewheeling through an endless diamond sky, I'm like a shooting star. I've come so far. I can't go back to what I used to be, to where I used to be. So all of these to get to the beef of my talk, which is Iranian women factories. My argument, and I did not Forgive me, I've had this nasty cold for over 3 weeks and I just can't get rid of it. What I'm about to tell you about freedom of movement in women writers is what I found in their writings. So it's not a theory imposed on women writers. They were my guide. They were the ones who showed me that major concern of women writers in the last 160 years in Iran has been the issue of movement, freedom of mobility, captivity as the opposite of flight, ultimate flying to a gateless sky where we can do all we want. If you look at the novels, at short stories, and at the poetry of Iranian women writers, you see two major sets of metaphors. One are the metaphors of captivity. There is a whole bunch of them. I enumerate some of them. Walls, veils, imposed silences, fences, cages, blind windows, closed doors, and bars. On the other hand, side by side with those, you see also metaphors of movement, sprouting wings, flying, going places, running, dancing, singing through their voice. And by the way, all of these were denied women immediately after the revolution, even in Iranian cinema. For instance, women were disallowed to run in Iranian cinema after the revolution. I mean, obviously they couldn't fly, but at least they could run. But there were specific instructions that women cannot run in movies anymore. So why do I keep saying that it's 160 years? Because I think 1848 was a momentous year in the history of the world. So it was in Iran. There was a convention in Badasht, in a small hamlet in northeastern Iran, where 81 men and 1 woman were gathered together it was the beginning of a religious movement, the Babi movement. And I say that as a Muslim woman. I have believed through my studies that is a nodal moment. But because she was a Babi woman, Muslims were not allowed to talk about her. Or if she was talked about as a prostitute. Even today, Qurratul Ain, which we should take pride in her. She is the first woman who unveiled herself publicly in the whole Islamic world. More importantly, she is the woman who appropriated the pulpit, who gave body to her voice and voice to her body. She allowed herself the reinterpretation of the scripture. So this wonderful image is an image on one side, on that side it's Qurratul Ain, on this side it's Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and as you know, she is the mother of the feminist movement, of women's movement in the West. That image, nobody even knew that there is such an image. I happened to give a talk at Seneca Falls Convention for their anniversary, 158th anniversary. And they told me there is a fantastic tapestry here. And to my surprise, I saw that in the US, there is a recognition that these two movements, that these two women should be recognized as pioneering in women's movement. This is one of the most anthologized poems of Tahireh Qurratul Ain, and I want to read it to you. What I want to do is to read just a couple of lines of the poem for you in Persian, because my translation really doesn't do justice to the absolute exquisite beauty of the original. So once you have a sense of the musicality of the Persian, then you will read this translation. And I'm going to share with you why I think this is such an important poem, and then why it has been adopted by the campaign for 1 million signature in Iran. گر به تو افتدم نظر چهره به چهره رو به رو شرح دهم غم تو را نکته به نکته مو به مو از پی دیدن رخت همچو صبا فتادم خانه به خانه کو به کو کوچه به کوچه کو به کو. I would explain all my grief dot by dot, point by point. If heart to heart we talk, and face to face we meet. To catch a glimpse of you, I'm wandering like the wind, from house to house, from door to door, from place to place, from street to street. Separated from you, the blood of my heart gushes from my eyes, in torrent after torrent, river after river, in wave upon wave, in river after river. This afflicted heart of mine has woven your love to the stuff of my life, strand by strand, thread by thread. You see, this poem is, to me, iconic in a way, because a woman is refusing to remain in her proper place. She's going from street to street, from house to house, in search of the beloved. Now, the wind, she becomes one with the wind. The wind has a very important role in Persian literature. The wind is the messenger of love. Many women in classical Persian literature, from Leyli to Zulekha to Vis, I mean, these are some of the most powerful women protagonists in classical Persian literature. They talk to the wind, which in turn becomes their messenger of love, because they cannot relay their love messages themselves, so they need a messenger. In this poem, she doesn't talk to the wind, she becomes the wind. She becomes the one who is not going to be stopped by any man-made obstacles. She is going to have, like Wonder Woman, like Spider Woman, her own wings to fly with. There are so many examples that I could give you. The bird is one of the most recurring image in the writing of Iranian women in the last 160 years. Now, as you know, Iran is known as the land of the rose and the nightingale. It's very beautiful, it's very poetic. It's the love of the nightingale for the rose. Except that the nightingale in Persian literature is always a man, is male, and the rose is always a woman, is feminized. Now, it's all beautiful, but what about the female nightingale? Where is she? Why is this jerk of the male nightingale not reading, serenading the female nightingale? What happens to her? She has been exiled from Iranian classical Persian literature. It is in the writing of women writers, women poets, that the female nightingale is brought back into the Iranian garden. This is a